Good evening, everybody.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Oh, Hashem, thank you.
Oh, Hashem.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so I think we're doing Gimel. It says here, Tzarich likrota kula. We said, right, that you have to read the whole thing. So he brings the source for this, Perek Bet Megillah. It's the second Perek of Megillah. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah there, Mehechan koret Adam et Megillah. So he says, from where does a person start to read the Megillah? V'yotzeh b'yedei chavado, and fulfills obligation. Rabbi Meir says, Kula, you have to read the whole thing. Rabbi Yehuda says, Meish Yehudi, from that pasuk, from that verse, Ish Yehudi. Rabbi Yossi says, Me'achar advarim ha'ele, from there. So we have three different opinions here. Ve'ifsika ilchata b'gemara, kedivrei ha'omer Kula, right? So in the Gemara, Paskins, halacha, like the one who says that you have to read the whole thing. So therefore, you got to read the whole thing. Okay, so then it goes on. And then we said, right, in the tour, that if you read it by heart, you didn't fulfill your obligation. Pashut tu b'sham b'mishnah, right? It's in the Mishnah there. Obviously, right? So therefore, it has to be all written in front of him, says the tour. It's also there in the Gemara, Sham, Yutet Amud Aleph, Halacha kedivya omer. Halacha is like the one that says kula. You have to read the whole thing. Even according to opinion, it says that you have to read from Ish Yehudi, right, which means the Jewish man. That's what it means. It has to be written out, everything, right? Even according to that opinion. So it says, "V'tafka lechatchila." That's only lechatchila, but b'diavad, right? But it says, but b'diavad, im ishmit ba sofer tevot. If the sofer left out some words, right, then he didn't write the whole thing out. So as we said, right, b'diavad, if a majority is written there, and so b'diavad, you fulfilled your obligation. Yes. So says the tour regarding this is Bet Yosef regarding that. At Sham over there, it's Yud Chet Amud Bet Tanu Abanan, right? It says Negi Braita Ishmit Ba Asofer Otiot. Let's say the sofer left out some words, right? Whatever letters, or psukim or verses. The Quran Kore Kimiturgaman, and the reader when he read it like a translator because those words were not written. He had to translate whatever. Like he read it orally. He read it by heart. So it says, he does fulfill obligation, right? So he brings an objection. As we said, right, that if there has some letters that are blotted out, or mikoraot, or ripped up, or rishuman, if they're recognizable, right, as we said, it's okay. Kshira, it's kosher. Veim lav pasula, if it's not recognizable, it's pasul. Lakashia. So right, so there seems to be a contradiction to what we said. So Gemara says no, there's no contradiction. Ha bekula, ha bekitzamim tzata. One is talking about all of it, which is like not good. That's already going to be a problem. And one is talking about a part of it. A part of it, if it's not good, we said right, it's okay. B'diavad. Katav Rambam ayu ba otiot metushtashot. So says the Rambam, right? If you had there, right, the letters that are blotted out, or mekuraot, or right, or torn up, or if the handwriting, right, if the trace of those letters is recognizable, im haya ruba shalem, if most of it was complete, kshira, it's kosher. Okay. Ve'im lav, if not so, psula, it's pasul. נראה מדבריו שהוא מפרש דמיעוטה קרוי מקצתה. So it seems like he calls, right, the minority is part of it, the רובה קרוי כולה. Just give me 1 second. Second, please. Yeah. Anyway, we'll continue. So he says, right, that like we said over there in Nazir, Mem Bet Amud Aleph, Rubo Kekulo, right? We said that the majority is like the whole thing. V'kachem divrei Rabbeinu. The Torah also says that. V'chen katuv be'orchot chaim. Also, this book says. Yeah, well, looks like I read the wrong piece here. That's why I was stopping. I went back, to anyway, we did a review here for something we did already a while ago. So I'll go back to where we were. We're on Yud Bet. I thought we were on. I apologize. Okay. So anyway.
Kabbalah Haraf is introduction.
Yeah, this is a review, basically. We already read this before.
Yeah.
It sounded familiar, that's why I was stopping. Okay, so anyway, we're going back to where we were, which is Yud Bet. Yud Gimel, I think. Yeah. Yeah, so we're going to Yud Gimel. So it says here, Haya koteva shekore pasuk vekotvo, right? So now we're going to a new case, right? Which is that he was reading and writing. So what does that mean? He writes it down, the verse, right? He's writing the Megillah. And as he writes it down, he reads it also. So the question is, did you fulfill your obligation like that? So the answer is yes. V'gamze Mishnah Sham, it's also Mishnah there, Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Haya kotva dorsha megiya im kiven libo yatsa. So the point is like this, right? That if you're reading it and you're also writing it or correcting it or whatever it is, so if you had intention to fulfill your obligation, you did. Ve'im lav lo yatsa. And if not, you didn't fulfill your obligation. If you didn't have intention. So intention is a very crucial thing, right? You have to have intention. So he establishes it in the Gemara. He qualifies it. I'm sorry. The whole thing is written in front of him. He's reading one verse by one verse by verse. With the Megillah, which is placed before him. So what is he doing? He's he's got the whole thing in front of him, and he's copying it over, writing a new one, whatever. Even according to one who says in Yitzhak Amud Aleph, ish Yehudi, so that you have to do from ish Yehudi, that's good enough. Tzricha shetek ktuva kula lefanav, but it has to be all written out, everything. Katav Rosh v'dorsha אף על פי שאסור להפסיק במגילה. So says the Rosh, and he's also extrapolating it, right, doing explanations, all kinds of things, darshaning, right, as we said. So he's darshaning it, and even though you're not allowed to do stops in the Megillah, right, to do interruptions, like it says in the second bracket, so here, when he says over that drasha, right, the explanation to the community, or doresh beno lebeno, right, or he's doing it just by himself, so it turns out that he's actually, making an interruption here, right? Instead of reading, straight through, he's, stopping and doing some, extrapolation, whatever you want to call it, right? Shemafsik b'kriyata, mikol makom yatsa b'diavad, but b'diavad he fulfills obligation. Alternatively, kevan she'eno doresh ela be'enyano shel Megillah, I cannot tell you another way to explain it, which is that since he's only darshaning, right, something which is, connected to the Megillah on the same theme, on the same topic, and so it's not going to be considered to be an interruption. It says in Yerushalmi, בדורשה, right, ובלבד שלא יפליגו דעתם לעניינים אחרים, right, but he says that right there that you can darshan, you can extrapolate, but what you shouldn't do is start talking about other topics, all of a sudden, bring something from left field, something else. We don't want that, right? Obviously, that's that you shouldn't do. Okay, so then it goes on, וזה שכתב רבנו ולא יפסיק בה בעניינים אחרים. That's exactly what Rabbeinu wrote, right? That you shouldn't interrupt with other things, right? So don't start talking about now something else, politics. You're talking about now, right? The elections and this and that, right? What does that have to do with what we're talking about? Yeah, you gotta make sure you stay on the topic, Okay, so let's go on. But that which he said to Tur, that he has to, have intention to read it properly. And not just somebody who reads it, to correct it. You know what I mean? He has to also have the intention to fulfill his obligation of the mitzvah. Right? That's what it says in the second parak of Brachot. So if he was reading, right, and came the time now to read the Megillah, to do the mitzvah, if he had his intention, he fulfills obligation. If not so, he didn't fulfill obligation. It says regarding it, right, regarding this in the Gemara, Shmamina, you learn from here, mitzvot sichol kavana, that mitzvot require intention, right? In other words, when you do a mitzvah, you have to have intention to do so. Otherwise, you didn't fulfill your obligation. But he pushes that out and says, what are you talking about that he had intention to read? To read. And he's reading. Right? He's reading to correct it. So he says lots of explanations were said about this. So he says, I wrote them in chapter 60. So he says, Rabbeinu seems to be going to Tosfot, which I wrote over there. He says, right, what that means. Okay, good. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch, right, 13, Yud Gimel. Okay. So, right, it says in Shulchan Aruch, Haya kotva shekore pasuk b'megillah shehu ma'atik mimena. Right. So what are we talking about here? That he is writing a new Megillah. So how do you do that? You copy it over from an existing one, right? So, and as he copies it over, each verse he reads it out. Right. So what happens over there? Im kiven libo letzet yedei chova yatsa. If he had intention to fulfill his obligation, he did. והוא שתהיה כתובה כולה לפניו במגילה שהוא מעתיק ממנה. But, right, he says, you have to have the whole Megillah in front of you. So what does that mean? You're copying it over, from a whole complete Megillah. That's what we're talking about. Also, if he was correcting it, right? Same thing. He's not copying over something new. He's just correcting the existing one. Same thing, right? Also, if he was, as we said, right, darshaning, extrapolating. He darshans as he reads on the verses, right? If he had intention to fulfill his obligation, he did so. But he says you shouldn't talk about other things, right? Darshaning is one thing, but don't talk about now, right? What happened in Iowa, and New Hampshire, who cares about that? What does that have to do with the with the Torah? What does that have to do with Megillah? You shouldn't talk about other things. Okay, good. That's the Shulchan Aruch, Yud Gimel. Let's go to Yud Daled. It says here is right that the Tur says, right? The reader has to also have intention to have fulfill his obligation when he reads. Rabbeinu Satam kidvarav kan kedat rosh. So he says he paskin like the Rosh here, Rabbeinu the Tur, shehu sover kedat omrim, that he holds like the opinion that says mitzvot tzrichat kavanah, that mitzvot require intention. Like right, it was explained in this chapter, right, which is 589. Okay. Right, so it says we deduce from here that since right we qualified the Mishnah, that if he had intention, he fulfills obligation. When he's correcting it, he's reading to correct it. That's in order that you shouldn't learn from there that the mitzvot require intention. But according to one says that the mitzvot do require intention. So even if he reads it in a normal way, it's okay, right? You can qualify like that. Okay.
What's the normal way?
That the normal way means that he didn't have intention.
Okay, thank you.
Just reading, right? In order to correct it, whatever he's doing there, right?
Okay.
That's what it means. Okay, so even there, like this, he didn't fulfill obligation. He has to have intention, right? That's the one point. So he says, since Rabbeinu the Tur, right, concludes that the mitzvot do require intention. Right? He shouldn't have written, and not like the one who reads to correct it. But so he says you have to say that in any case, right? Since after Divrei Omer, even according to one who says that mitzvot don't require intention, so he does admit, right, in a case where he shouldn't read like one who intends to correct it. And even though it concludes the Tur that mitzvot do require intention, katav ken lomar beha kule alma mode. Right. So it says regarding this, everybody, he wrote this in order to tell you, teach you that regarding this, everybody admits. And then he goes on, להוציאו ואינו דווקא יחיד הקורא אבל השליח ציבור מסתם דעתו על הכל. So he says, right, that also another thing which we require, the Torah says, that the reader has to have intention to fulfill the obligation of the one who's listening, right? The listener. He requires that. So it says the Torah, right, regarding that only applies, in a private setting. But if you're talking about somebody who's a chazan, Baal Koreh, somebody who's a reader, the appointed reader, right? Then we assume that of course, he has in mind to fulfill the obligation of the whole community, everybody who's there, So you don't require, special intention for that, because we assume, right, that he has that intention. You know what I mean? Why is he reading for everybody? Because he has to fulfill the obligation. So that's why, right? Let's say, for instance, I'll give you an example where this applies, this concept. For instance, let's say a person, they were reading the Megillah in the shul, and one guy is like standing outside the room. Let's say he's standing in the hallway, right? But the reader doesn't see this guy, right? He doesn't see him there because he's outside. So the question is, does he fulfill the obligation of somebody that he's not even cognizant that the guy's there? This is the question, So according to this, right, we just said no. We say that he doesn't have to be cognizant of anything, because the fact that he's the shliach tzibur, he's the chazan, Baal Koreh, that means that, automatically he has the intention to fulfill the obligation of anybody who happens to be listening there. So therefore, even though, he doesn't have intention on that particular person who's standing outside, doesn't matter. It works anyway. That's what we're saying. So yeah, so he says that regarding this Bet Yosef, he says this was already explained in that chapter, right? That we talked about. So then he goes on. Yerushalmi brings Yerushalmi, and medaktakin b'tauyotea. Oh, so this is right, one of the most interesting topics of the Megillah. That right, it says Yerushalmi that we're not so particular when it comes to mistakes, in the Megillah. So we should read this in the Torah inside, because there's things here that which are not quoted there. So let's see the Torah inside. Right, so it says the Torah like this: Yerushalmi en medaktakin b'tauyotea. Right, so it says that we're not particular about the mistakes. Right. So, by the way, is that the same in the Sefer Torah? Are we particular about this mistakes in the Sefer Torah? So the answer is yes, we are very particular about that. Right. So the Rambam says, even the little mistake, that a person made when he reads the Sefer Torah, we have to correct him, and tell him to go back and read it again. So when it comes to Sefer Torah, we are very exacting and precise. There's no monkey business there. But now the question is, right, does that also apply to the Megillah? Or are we a little bit more lax, with the Megillah? Because, the Megillah is only from the rabbis, after all, right? So maybe we can be a little bit more lenient, blah, 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 right? Maybe the rabbis were not so precise and exacting about this mitzvah. And by the way, there's a reason why they wouldn't be. And the reason is because, after all, it's like the whole point is, with the Megillah, like you want to hear the story, like you want to get the narrative, and one little mistake is not going to change anything, you know what I mean? Like you still got it. You got the narrative. And so this is the reason why we're not so precise about the Megillah. because the whole point is, they just want you to get the story, make sure you understand what happened there, the miracle that occurred, the whole story, the salvation, blah, blah, blah. And so once you know that, what do I really care, about one little letter, you read the wrong way. Right? That's the idea, So let's go on a little bit because we have to explain what that means, right? How that works. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba Rabbi Chanina Abu Yatve Kamed Derav. So these rabbis were sitting all together. So he says, Chad Kare Yehudim, the Chad Kare Yehudim, right? So one person, right, read Yehudim, which means the Jews, right? But then the other one reads Yehudim with two yuds, So it's a little bit different, you understand? One yud, two yuds, it's not read exactly the same way. What's the difference? When you read Yehudim with two yuds, it's like a longer, vowel there, Yehudim, right? But Yehudim, right? Short. That's with one yud. Two yuds, it's like Yehudim. So here's like an example, right? You didn't read it exactly the right way. One read it, short. The other one read it a little bit longer. So, question is, do we tell him to go back and read it again, or do we just let him go, let him slide? So he says, right, that none of them went back to read it again. So meaning what? That, these kind of small mistakes, are not really so significant. So therefore, we let it go. We let it slide, But we're gonna, talk a little bit about this a little bit more. But we're gonna elaborate on this. But the point is like this, that the reason why we're not so precise here about this kind of thing is because the two words mean the same thing, with two yuds, one yud, it means the same thing, has the same meaning. But right, we're gonna see that if you made a mistake where the meaning changes, the meaning of the word changes, that's already something else. So that we cannot let it go, right? We have to correct that. Okay.
Does that apply with the whole Ayin Aleph situation too?
Oh, Ein and Aleph. Oh, that's a good one. Oh my God. Well, if you're a Sephardi, right, then you did that, you made that mistake. It's like a little card, you're gonna be going on death row basically for that. You know, you're gonna be, God forbid, you're gonna be executed for that.
But there are cases where it changes.
I'm joking, I'm exaggerating a little bit.
But I mean, there are cases where it changes the meaning of the word.
It does. It's true. Yeah, you have to be careful with that. Like for instance, regarding Birkat HaKohanim, right? Over there, it says in Shulchan Aruch, you have to be very careful not to switch the Ain and the Aleph. Why? Because you could get the wrong meaning altogether. You know what I mean? There are places like this where it really messes it up big time, So again, right, the same rule applies regarding this Ain and Aleph. The rule is that if you read it and it changed the meaning of the word, you got a problem, you got to go read it again. But if it just, you weren't so precise, and you didn't go into your throat and bring out that Ain, like the Sephardi way. You know what I mean? We'll let you slide on that one, probably. You know what I mean? As long as people understand what you read. Because otherwise, if it wasn't so, right, you couldn't even go to an Ashkenazi reading, and reading, you wouldn't be able to go to an Ashkenazi reading, right? If that was the case, you know what I mean? So you can go to an Ashkenazi reading, if you don't have a Sephardi one, right? If you're a Sephardi, you don't have a Sephardi reading, you can go to Ashkenazi reading. Why is that? Because you know what they're saying, you know what I mean? Like, like you get it. They don't read it, the Ayin the proper way, but you know what they're talking about. So, as long as the meaning of the word is not changed, you're good. That's the idea, Okay, so yeah. So, but especially when you go to Israel, you have to know that if you don't read the Ayin over there, boy, you're gonna be in trouble. They're gonna have your head. They're gonna get on your case for that. They don't forgive on that in Israel. Okay. So Right, that's the way it is. Okay, so anyway, right, but as we said, right, the rule is like that, like I told you, that if you go to Ashkenazi reading, you're okay as long as you understand what they're saying, which you should. I hope you do. Right?
It's
Sometimes
not easy. The tavs and slavs are really distracting.
what I was gonna say is that with the Hasidic reading, I'm saying sometimes you don't really understand what they're saying. You know what I mean? Like because they go way off. Like they really twist it. Like twist it around. So better to go to a regular Ashkenazi reading. Okay, I tell you. Okay, well, there's always priorities, what I mean? Whatever, right? The best thing is to go to a Sephardi reading, especially if you're a Sephardi, right? But if you can't, right, go to a normal Ashkenazi, right? Don't go to Hasidish because Hasidish, they really, exaggerate, the changes. They really, whatever. I wouldn't recommend it so much. Let's put it this way. Okay. But if you got nothing better, what can you do, right? Maybe you can get away with that. Maybe, perhaps. Okay. So, like I remember, I had a friend over here who came from Israel, and so he was praying at a Hasidic, minyan, in the morning, shachrit. So he comes and tells me, he says, I don't understand. He says these Hasidim, he says, instead of starting with the word hodu, they start hodi, hodi. It's like, instead of saying hodu, they say hodi. So that's already a big change, you know what I mean? It's like you don't want to get involved in that stuff, you know what I mean? Better to stay away from it. Okay. They make the O into an E, right? That's what they do. They change it, they do it on purpose, whatever. Okay, so anyway, right, getting back to what he said. So, ויש מפרשים דווקא בטעות כי היא של לשון עניין אחד, אבל טעות אחר לא, right? So again, right, he says, some say it only applies when the meaning doesn't change. But if the meaning does change, then you got a problem. Like we just mentioned, right? שאם כן לא קראה כולה, because then, right, the problem is that you're not reading the whole Megillah. You didn't read the whole Megillah, right? Because, something you said wrong. And the meaning changed, so you got a problem. Right? Okay, good. Sarah Bene Haman. Also, right, when you say the 10 sons of Haman, right? When you mention those names, Bene Shimei, you ever say all in one breath, right? You ever notice this? That the Chazan, right, the Baal Koreh, says the whole name, the 10 names. He tries to do it in one breath. Lechatchila, you should try to do that. But the Avad, it's okay, But lechatchila, you should try. Yerushalmi tzarich leomram b'neficha echad b'asara imahem. So that's also from Yerushalmi, right? You have to say in one breath. Okay, let's go on. So he says, good. So let's do the Bet Yosef. So it says the Bet Yosef regarding what we just read. Katvu Arosh, right? It's also written in the Rosh, this whole thing. V'aran, also the Ran. V'ika lemedak tehavale lomar, right? And there is, right, to deduce here. They should have said ahadar leman de ta'eh, right? That no, 1 second. Did I say it right? Yeah, ahadar man de amar velo ahadar. And he didn't go back to leman man de amar yudim deahu de ta'eh aval hahu de amar yudim de shapir kamar lo havale lemahadre. ויש לומר דלא נחית השתא תלמודה להשמינן המינאי שפיר כאמר man de amar yudim or man de amar yudim. So it says the Bet Yosef, right, that if you notice, right, that when we talked about the story where one said Yehudim and one said Yehudim, right, with two Yuds, so they didn't really notify us there in the Talmud who was right and who was wrong, but none of them went back. So he says the reason they they didn't specify who made the mistake, is because it doesn't really matter. Whichever one it may be, it's all the same. You know what I mean? So therefore, right, either way, it's okay. אלא להשמינן דלא הדר למאן דתאי משום הכי כאמר ולא הדר אחד מניו. ואפשר דאיכא פלוגתא איקרינן יהודים או יהודים. Says also there's another way to explain it, which is that maybe there's actually a dispute, which is the proper way to read that word, right? Yehudim or Yehudim, right? And we're not sure which one is the right one. So therefore, right, either way, you're okay, because, as we said, right, it doesn't change the meaning of the word. So he says that, right, the one who said that story didn't know who was right and who was wrong. So it says Rav definitely do, and since he didn't go back, you didn't tell him to go back. So you see from there that we're not particular about mistakes, right? When it comes to Megillah, as we said, right? As long as the meaning doesn't change. Okay. So then he goes on here, right, a little bit more. As we said, right? Now he brings that point where, some say it only applies when the meaning doesn't change. That's what it says in Iran. Right? So it says even though you can push it out, that, right, whoever reads, you can push it out and say whoever reads the word, even though he didn't read it right properly, he read the whole thing, still called he read the whole thing. So it says this book that some say dafka yudim, right, something like that, 1 yud, 2 yuds, right, as we said. Yashav or menupal, right, if he changes the word altogether, like that, nafal ukudome, or like this, vaday chozer, he has to go back, right? So in other words, according to this opinion, it has to be something like a very small mistake like this, one yud, 2 yuds. But if you have something larger, so meaning what? That the structure of the word is being changed altogether, the tense or, whatever it may be, right? The plural, right? The singular, this, that's already a big mistake, you got to go back for that. So let's see how the Shulchan Aruch paskins, right, regarding this. We found here several opinions regarding this issue. So it says, הקורא את המגילה צריך שיכוון להוציא השומע. Right? So he says, if you're reading the Megillah, you have to have intention from both sides, right? The one who's listening has to have the intention to fulfill his obligation from the reader, and also the reader to the listener. It's a two-way street, right? Takes two to tango, as they say, right? You have to have intention both ways. But he says, if it's shliach tzibur, that's something else, right? Then we assume that his intention is on everybody. That's something else. We're not talking about that. As I told you, right? He points out the Shulchan Aruch, even if they're behind the shul, they're not in the room. They're outside, But still, his intention is on them too. Why not? Right? He came there to fulfill the obligation of everybody, right? Not just half the crowd, right? You know what I mean? Obviously. So he goes on. Another thing is, as we said, right? We're not so particular about the mistakes. So now the question is, right? What does that mean, right? Some say that means that, right? That's only when the meaning doesn't change, right? Right? Like these two, right? Talmidim that were sitting in front of Rav. One said Yehudim, one said Yehudiim, right? Like something like that. Very small mistake. ואחד קרא יהודים ואחד קרא יהודים, ולא הדר אחד מן היו. Right? And so he says, and neither one went back, right? אבל טעות אחר לא. But if it's a different mistake, right? Not so.
Would that also qualify if you skipped a word?
if you skip the word, right? So that's a bigger problem. If you skip the word. So if the reader skips a word, we have to tell him to go back and read it again. Because he's got to read the whole thing, right? From top to bottom.
Okay.
So let me just explain that, right, a little bit. Let me elaborate on that. That because we already read through this, this whole topic, pretty much covered it, right, from all the angles. So I'll just, review now, right, a little bit of a review. What we said is like this, right, that you have to read the whole Megillah, right? That's the halacha. So if you skip the word, you got a problem. You did not fulfill your obligation. That's one thing. But there's also another thing, which is that sometimes you have a Megillah which is lacking words, or lacking verses, right? So what about if the reader read those words, orally, right? So he read it by heart. So b'diavad, you fulfill your obligation. Why is that? Because he read the whole thing, some of it was by heart. So b'diavad, the obligation is fulfilled. But we said, right, that's only if it's a minority missing, of the topic matter, right, of the text, But if you have a majority missing, that's already, you can't. There's no way to correct that.
So
Yeah.
for someone who doesn't know the Hebrew, they wouldn't necessarily know whether something was missed or a word was mispronounced. Is it still?
Yeah, well, we're getting into a sticky topic here, All right, that's a sticky one, right? Why do I tell you that? Because this is where, it becomes into like kind of like a, where you get into doubts about this kind of thing. I'll explain to you what I mean. What I mean to say is like this, right? That sometimes, a person is listening to the Megillah. Now, the one who reads it, that's something else, right? The reader himself, he knows if he read it or not, right? That's for sure. He knows what he read. He knows what he didn't read. But here's the problem, right? When it comes to the listener, he doesn't always know what he heard. Sometimes he's just like daydreaming. You know what I mean? So the question is, if the listener is like daydreaming a little bit, does he fulfill his obligation? And the answer is yes, it has to be, because otherwise, right, none of us have fulfilled our obligation ever. Because we all daydream, you know what I mean? So as long as you heard it, in other words, it went into your ears, even though it didn't register because you're daydreaming, you did fulfill your obligation because you heard it. But right, so like these are like gray areas now, and we're getting into the gray area. By the way, I do have some posts on this written, in halakha, that I posted, in the former years. I'm going to post them again this year, B'ezrat Hashem. So the thing is, that there are some Rishonim who say that the listener, who didn't hear one word, did not fulfill his obligation. So you got to be careful, like in other words, to make sure that you're not making any noise or somebody else is not making noise, because it could be, that one word didn't really go into your ear, because there was noise or something or whatever, whatever it was. So you got to try as hard as you can to make sure, that you hear the whole thing. But it doesn't mean you have to, it all has to register, because, we daydream, how it is, right? But anyway, the point is like this, right? What I wrote in my post was, if you're not sure, let's say, if you didn't hear one word or something like that, you can be lenient because it's only rabbinical, Since it's only rabbinical, we go in rabbinical doubts, we go lenient, right? That's the way it is. So, right, that's the reason why you can be lenient, But if you're sure that you didn't hear some parts, you know what I mean? So then what do you do? So what you do is, you should read it yourself. Like, even though you don't have a kosher Megillah, but since you're doing the minority by heart, you'll be okay. So in other words, if you didn't hear some words from the Chazan, right? and whatever it was, for some reason you didn't hear, just look into your Megillah and read it yourself, and catch up to him, because that means you read the minority of it by heart, which is okay. B'diavad. Okay, are we getting somewhere with that? Are we right?
Thank you.
I hope we're getting somewhere. Okay, that's pretty much a story, right? What can I tell you, right? So you got to be careful. The bottom line is, right, you got to be careful, make sure. That's why we don't want these kids with the noisemakers over there, coming in, making noise, because, we're not going to hear the Megillah like that, That's the reason we tell them, to wait till the end and then to, make their noises in the end, right? In Israel, they used to listen when we used to tell them that. Here in America, nobody listens, so what you have to do is when the kids start making noise, you have to, the Chazan has to reread the whole thing, that, during the noise, He has to read that part. He has to reread that. Because, we have to assume that the people didn't hear because of the noise. There's all kinds of issues, it's not so simple. Okay, very good. So be blessed with wealth, health, happiness. Thanks for coming. Chazak Baruch. We'll see you tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem. And pray for our amazing soldiers. I'm looking at videos today of the job that they're doing over there. Unbelievable work. My God. These soldiers are so brave. And so powerful. Hashem is on their side. What can I tell you? It's and right. You just have to give our hats off to these people. How they're suffering there. Going and and they have no qualms about it. They go in. They're so brave and so powerful. It's just incredible. It's unbelievable. Hashem should help them to finish off all the Nazis. B'ezrat Hashem. Amen. Amen. Chazak Baruch.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
Amen.